Hello everybody, and welcome to Some Patches Required, a show where we hope to educate and entertain you on the ever-turbulent games industry. As always, I am one of your hosts, Aaron.
And I'm your other host, Zach.
And this week, we have decided to take a break from kind of talking about some of the hairier issues in the games industry to talk about some of the fuzzy ones.
Fuzzy?
No, seriously, the terrible
like
jokes
peach
aside.
Fuzz?
Yeah, basically. No, I was looking for a light synonym. Yeah, we decided that it's been a minute since we kind of talked about the state of the AAA games industry, and there's a lot going on in that space that we kind of wanted to address. But before we get too deep into the nitty-gritty of it, as always, to all of our returning listeners, thank you so much for sticking with us. And if it's your first time, thank you for hopping on. If any of you would not mind too terribly following us on any of our social media platforms, sharing the show around, subscribing on YouTube and whatnot, that is legitimately our best, biggest, and only way of growing. So it legitimately does help us out a lot. But outside of that, I think you all are doing your part for the show just fine. So
I'm doing my part. Or whatever.
Thank you,
the
little
Starship
Timmy. What's
Trooper.
your part?
I hate bugs.
Who
I don't
doesn't?
remember any of the other lines from that. Do you want to live forever from that? I don't think it is. I think that's from a different movie.
I do not recall off the top of my head.
No,
I'm
important.
I'm an embarrassment to nerddom.
Probably. But you know who isn't an embarrassment to nerddom? E-Doug-E-R. No, okay. Anyway. Yeah, so to Aaron's point, for a few reasons, we wanted to just talk a little bit about the state of the AAA games industry specifically, because it's a bit of a shit show in some ways. And there I go again, cursing in the first 5 minutes of the episode. So there goes any monetization that's going to happen.
Well, fuck monetization.
Not that we would ever get it anyway. We don't have enough viewers. But that point aside, yeah, Aaron, it's a bit hairy out there. You've got plenty of companies trying to go with safe bets. Wonderful games like Suicide Squad and Skull and Bones coming out. Well, I guess one of those is a quadruple A game. So technically that can't be part of this discussion, but
Yeah, that's a whole different class of game. But looking at the overall AAA and quadruple A, of course, ecosystem, it's kind of a mess right now. The most much, like you literally just said, Zach, the two highest profile examples of that right now are, of course, Warner Brothers' famous, great genre-defining game, Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League, and then Ubisoft's quadruple A magnum opus, I think, Skull and Bones. And neither one is performing very well, even though both are theoretically built around the same revenue stream concept. So we thought it might be, interesting to kind of look at that. So starting with Suicide Squad Killed the Justice League, a game that we've kind of danced around a little bit in the past. If you're not familiar with the concept, it is essentially the outstanding team at Rocksteady Studios who made the Batman Arkham games, not including Origins, which is kind of the dark sheep of the family for, in my opinion, very valid reasons. They were brought in to kind of expand on their Arkham universe, but Warner Brothers wanted to make it live service so that they could have a constant stream of revenue rather than, the one and done purchasing of something like the Arkham games. The game came out to just flatline mediocre reviews, which is tremendously disappointing to me on a personal level, considering Rocksteady is actually on a short list of studios that I would buy almost anything from. But I stand here not the owner of Suicide Squad Kill the Justice League. But the game has underperformed by just about any metric. Fan engagement is not high. The critical reception has not been great. And yet Warner Brothers, in a recent investor meeting, not specifically for Warner Brothers, but in like a large investment meeting, basically said that live service is still the future of games. That is the direction they want to go, despite the fact that within the last calendar year, they had a high-profile live service failure and a tremendously high-profile single-player success.
Yeah, I think it's very interesting when you look at... Also, I just want to say candidly, like, I've played Hogwarts Legacy, and I think it's a pretty boring game.
It's boring as all get out.
I just want to, like, let that be known. It's not that great. Like, I think the IP carries a lot of the positive reviews for Hogwarts Legacy, but, like, regardless of that, it doesn't eliminate the fact that it was considered a high-profile, I think, success from a single-player perspective for a single-player game.
It demolished records. It dethroned Call of Duty as, you know, a best-selling game in a market where that doesn't happen. And so yeah, it was like an enormous hit.
Well, and the interesting thing, I'm going to pivot away from Hogwarts Legacy for a second, but just back to Suicide Squad, is that with Suicide Squad, what I think is interesting is it's also an example of having a game where the monetization system is forced into the game, and so are some different elements to kind of support people playing the game for longer. Well, actually, I don't know how many of those are still in the game. I actually haven't played the game. I just know for a time they had RPG mechanics built into the game with like gear, so there were different stats that would provide different values, so you could do some like build theory crafting and whatnot. But what's so infuriating about a lot of games, including Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, at least at that time, is a lot of games they just put in these RPG mechanics as a way to keep players engaged with the game and make it feel like it's artificially bigger than it is. But those mechanics don't benefit the game. Like, the stats are often really clunky and weird, and they don't come together to really form like a build like you often have in a lot of ARPGs, like Diablo or Path of Exile or that kind of thing. So I think that's a really interesting thing, because in my mind, that just illustrates where Warner Brothers' head is with Suicide Squad from the very beginning, which is really trying to milk this thing like a cash cow from the live service perspective, but also keep people invested with these really cheap mechanics that, in their mind, will elongate the amount of playtime that players spend with the game.
Right. Suicide Squad is a prime example of just poor top-down leadership, in my opinion. I mean, Rocksteady, you know, uneven execution at certain points, to be sure. Arkham Knight has maybe 30% more content than it needs, actually, for example. But by and large, as a single-player studio developing single-player experiences, they're outstanding. So the fact that Warner Brothers not only mandated live service elements be shoehorned into a single-player game, but then, you know, arguably threw in these looter-shooter style mechanics that are designed to engage you constantly and keep you grinding for the next best thing, to make your best build, to do this, you know, whatever. The two ideas aren't necessarily congruous. The team was not prepared necessarily to make a live service game, and the bones of their previous projects were based on single-player third-person action video game mechanics. Single player, not live service, not any other thing. And it's not to say that studios can't have tremendous success switching genres and whatnot, but when it's forced upon a development studio as part of a larger management strategy, it's not hard to start to see the cracks. And Suicide Squad is just cracks. None of the mechanics seem to, based on all accounts, line up with one another. So the game itself is fundamentally flawed because it's trying to be too many things at once, all in service of these live service ambitions. So what could have been a decent single-player game is now just a bad single player game.
Well, it's really interesting because if you look back to what you were alluding to, because I don't think you actually finished the whole statement, but what you were alluding to in the beginning was the conversation that Warner Brothers has had where they view Hogwarts Legacy, which is this, by all accounts, successful single-player game, as being too risky of a prospect to develop in the future, and instead that they should be focusing on these live service games like Suicide Squad, Kill the Justice League, which is just very weird to me, and I'm sure to you as well, Aaron, because the game, I can't remember the exact story because I don't really play these Rocksteady games, but didn't it come out in beta or some footage leaked about, or not leaked, but came out about the game, and then the whole community was in an uproar about all of these like live service looter shooter mechanics that just didn't make any sense. And so what I think is really frustrating is Warner Brothers has had community feedback for a very long time, and they're still pretending like this is the right direction to go when people have actively told them they don't like this stuff. I will say I understand why they weren't able to pivot with Suicide Squad that much because the game was so far in development, like sunk cost fallacy, whatever, right? But like, I feel like the community that is supporting WB is not screaming, we want live service games, especially as so many fail, like so frequently.
Yeah. In fact, the exact inverse is most likely true because there are like fan petitions for whatever good those are out there right now, petitioning to save the sequel to Hogwarts Legacy, basically, from being live service. So the community does not want these changes. I don't think the community dislikes live service games. Look at Helldivers 2. Right now is exploding everywhere. It's the biggest game, going right now. But that game is not successful purely because it's live service. It's successful because it's a good game.
Yeah.
It just so happens that its live service roots and core mean that it is getting this engagement that everybody wants. But
well, I think it's a situation, Aaron, of like, if you think about Helldivers, I don't know if you've played it. I know it's probably not the normal kind of game that you would be as engaged with, but it provides solid moment-to-moment gameplay. It really sells the fantasy. It has a lot of content. It's visually pretty stunning. It's co-op. It's a lot of fun.
Right.
The monetization in the game isn't egregious. My point where I'm going with this is Helldivers is not made as a game to purposely extract as much money from the players as humanly possible. A lot of these AAA games at this point, to kind of, look at the macro level, are being developed purely to milk players for as much as they're worth. We're seeing pretty frequently. And so it leads to situations where it's like, I don't want to spend on this game because the base game is shit. And then it's just so obvious where they're trying to shoehorn in, spend money here, spend money there. Like, to go back to the state of AAA a few years ago, which was still equally, I think, as crummy. I mean, to me, it's like with the, is it Assassin's Creed Odyssey is the one where there were the XP issues and like you basically had to buy the XP packs in order to make the game like playable?
I don't think that was Odyssey. If anything, it might have been Valhalla.
I think it was Odyssey. It was the Greek one.
Then that was odd. I don't remember. I never had that problem with Odyssey, but
Did you play it after? Well, regardless, that was one of the criticisms levied against the game. That
I recall that
XP was not coming quick enough and all this other stuff. But anyway, like that's clearly monetization impacting gameplay in a negative way, and I think that we're going to continue to see that over and over again when we've got studios like Warner Brothers who have very publicly admitted that their goal, and this makes sense, right, is to stabilize finances. They view things like Hogwarts Legacy as a risk because it's not a consistent revenue stream. It's just a big spike in the revenue stream when the game comes out, if it does successfully. And if it doesn't do successfully, then they lose about a bunch of money. So all of these gross changes are all because of just like stakeholder capitalism and companies looking to stabilize their finances. like, understandable if you look at the company's goals, why these things are happening, but I do not think it's conducive to creating good games.
I would agree with you. The profit chasing mentality is, in my opinion, reaching ahead, right? And I think to kind of branch into a slightly larger idea here in a sec, this is going to, like, if the trend continues this way, if Warner Brothers' grand vision for the future is what we all have to live with, we're just going to see the schism between AAA games and something more like a AA game really widen, because at the end of the day, the fact that a company like Warner Brothers is looking at fan outcry saying, please do not do this thing, fan adoration for having done the thing that they are now viewing as a risk, and saying, well, this other game that we kind of pumped out is definitely the future. The fact that they are doing that means they are no longer making the games for us, right? These particular companies are making the games for investors. The developers in the trenches are making the games for the love of the game. I believe, by and large, that is true. But the investors are the ones they're the target audience now. So these AAA studios, more likely the publishers and the owners, and as we see consolidation, this is only going to get more prevalent, they have the power, read money, to make it so that in the AAA space, this is the only kind of experience we can get. Single player games, I understand from a financial perspective, don't have the same yield as a live service thing. And when your target audience is a shareholder or a huge investor, that's what you're going to go with. So at the end of the day, we're going to have, I think, maybe this kind of IP wasteland of live service universes in the AAA space, where it's just, this is where Batman lives. This is where Spider-Man lives. This is where Harry Potter lives. This is where Paul Atreides lives, if they can manage to make him a popular character in today's culture. Star Wars lives over here. Those live in AAA, in an endless nightmare of crossovers and stuff like that. And then the AA space is where single player games are going to start coming out of, maybe. But because, I mean, like, Sony is doing this. The trend is not slowing down. Sony, as a parent company, the veneer is starting to fade away with news of things like they were trying to but they were trying to encourage Insomniac into making a live service Spider-Man game, which,
Insomniac famous for making live service games.
Yeah, that studio famous for live service games, Insomniac, and we've seen how well Destiny has been doing under Sony's stewardship.
To be fair, to be fair with the Destiny thing, I think that's just Bungie issues. Like, I legitimately think that Bungie has been a hot mess for a while, and I would view Sony as being. I mean, we'll see what happens. Maybe some story will come out, but I think that's all on Bungie mostly.
But I will still throw my hat on the side of not loving that Destiny 2 is going to get Ghostbusters cosmetics just because Sony owns Ghostbusters.
Well, that's kind of the interesting thing of, like, the Fortniteization of every game, right?
Everything.
Like, so we're talking about. So I want to make this point before I go into the Fortniteization of everything, which is that there are very few games that are successful long-term live services. In my mind right now, there's Final Fantasy XIV, there's World of Warcraft, which even World of Warcraft has suffered in player decline, but it's still doing pretty well. There's Fortnite, Apex Legends has generally speaking been doing pretty well. I'm sure I'm missing a few. But my point is that it's not the majority of live service games that are coming out. The majority of live service games that are coming out are failing. They may not be failing to the degree that Anthem failed, but they are not doing well. And so what frustrates me is it's literally just like, what sounds good to investors? Oh, a live service game, because the earning potential on a live service game is so high. But it's like, I would love to see what the actual profit yield is from each of these games, because most of them are not successful. And then to get to the Fortnite part, we did our whole episode on Fortnite. I actually play Fortnite. I love Fortnite. I think one of the cool things with Fortnite is they can do all these crossovers because Fortnite is functionally like a toy box, and it feels very much like a toy box because it's cartoony. That being said, when you bring random franchises into games like Gears of War with the Terminator thing that happened for Gears of War, I think it was 5. There was some
Probably
random
5.
crossover that just didn't make any sense. And then like what you're saying with Ghostbusters and Destiny, or having Snoop Dogg in COD, like it doesn't benefit the immersion of the game. You know, talking about Helldivers and how this game sells this world. COD doesn't get sold as a world to me when there's Snoop Dogg, other rappers running around, and then random characters from different IPs. Like,
right. My issue, I'll even like COD, like if it's Warzone or something like that. How deep is the lore that anyone gives a shit about?
Well, I agree with you on that point. But I've
where
heard
the fuck
complaints.
Does Slimer fit into all of the lore for? I know people who are deep in the Destiny lore because Bungie hides their lore and shit too. Also, sorry if you hear cat noises. Mildred has decided to make herself known. And she's still post-op, so I can't kick her out of the room. But
Here's my overshare.
Yeah, no, sorry to cut you off, but Slimer doesn't fucking jive with the lore of Destiny 2. That isn't established. That's like if there was Baldur's Gate 3 DLC with fucking Mr. Beast.
I mean, it's definitely more egregious in Destiny because of the kind of game it is. But I just think in any of these hyper-realistic games, it's just really fucking weird. Unless it's something like the finals, which is played off as like a game show. I think then you can play off more goofy cosmetics. But like, yeah, so I'm looking at these cosmetics now. It looks like the Slimer is the ghost skin. And then you get the car. There's a Ghostbusters car that they're adding.
Yeah, the Ecto one.
Yeah, these don't fit in the world very well at all.
But they need events, and they realize that Fortnite has the flexibility by not really having its own super established lore. It's more of a toy box. You can do whatever the fuck you want with Fortnite.
Yeah. But and I think that's because Epic has handled it very well. With the way that they're positioning themselves to kind of be a metaverse, I think they've been the most successful in comparison to a lot of other studios and places. I do think it's interesting you're bringing up events because in one of the videos that I watched, it was talking about Apex Legends and how one of the ways that they help boost their quarterly revenue is through these crossover events. So like they did one with Final Fantasy. There was one that they did recently that it wasn't like actually provocative. It was just really interesting. But regardless, like it's exactly what you're talking about. Basically, they're kind of ruining the art and immersion in these worlds to like pursue profit. And I'm sure some people are like, oh, who cares? It's not that big of a deal, which like, I guess, but it's kind of the closest you can get to selling out, I feel like. For some of these games, it just feels lame and kind of scummy. And I think it's fine to have like referential armor that references things like in a MOBA or something. But again, like, I just think you got to know your game. And some of these games, these events just don't make any sense. And I think it actively hurts the game.
The problem is we're looking at like holistic user experience, not what will get teens online.
Well, no, you're 100% right because our motivation is good games, not money. Because ultimately, like that's the distinction, right? Is like stakeholders don't give a shit about games being good. Like capitalism doesn't care about games being good. It assumes that higher profit margins means better game, but that's not true. Like,
no, it's wicked not. I mean, like to use your example of Hogwarts Legacy, because I've also played Hogwarts Legacy. Hogwarts Legacy is a totally functional game.
Yeah, and that's about all I'd say. Just kidding.
It's got somebody involved in the production of it clearly knew what charm was.
Yeah.
Maybe they didn't have the strongest grasp of it, but they were aware of the concept. they'd clearly watched the Harry Potter movies. Inexplicably, it seems like they couldn't license a single note of the original music. But the game itself is very by the numbers open world 2015 style stuff. You know, it's not.
It could have been any other IP in that format of game, and it would have felt largely the same.
It could have been called Castle Chaps, and it could have been a completely original IP, and you know, it would have been fine, but it wouldn't have sold nearly as well. People would have been looking at it and going,
actually.
Yeah, exactly. And then people probably would have been like, well, this is half a game, kind of. It's just a lot of content with not fully fleshed out ideas. So no, it's not about games. They're not. Brings me back to my point, my twofold point, which is, one, IP wasteland is going to be AAA. I remember when it was a big deal to see a copy of Uncharted 3 in a digital game store in the first The Last of Us. They're like, oh, Naughty Dog referenced their own game. And now it's like, we're all bored by watching Bugs Bunny get sucker punched by Superman. Like, it's over. The idea of novelty and crossovers is gone now. That's dead. But all of these IPs are where people see reliable money. So those live in AAA now. They're going to be crossed over. They're going to be spun off. They're going to be live serviced. It's a AAA IP wasteland.
Well, the thing that makes it even more depressing is if you, generally speaking, look at the movement of a lot of these large publishers and AAA studios, it's all towards consolidation on the IPs that they know are going to do well, or the types of games that they know are going to do well. So I think like the really good example of that is if you look at Ubisoft, right? Ubisoft has functionally tried to put one of their games in every single like large genre of game. And it's like, yeah, technically it might be a new IP, but it's not like changing anything for the better. Like there's X Defiant, which is kind of like a COD replacement. There's Rainbow Six Siege, which is kind of like a Counter-Strike replacement. I wouldn't say those two games are the same, but they kind of serve a similar niche. And then there's Hyperspace, which I actually haven't played, but my understanding is that's kind of like their Apex Legends version. And so what we see is there's all these games that have, all these AAA studios that have these games that are functionally the same as other AAA studio games. And when I was thinking about this, Aaron, what kind of came to mind that made me laugh is it's kind of like how all cars these days generally look the same. Like everybody has their version of someone else's car. So it's almost exactly the same thing. There's no risk taking. We've seen a massive divestment in new IP that's considered risky. I mean, for God's sake, even IP people know is going to be successful. EA just canceled a shooter game that's based on The Mandalorian because they didn't view that as being solid enough of a bet. And it would kind of be, it wouldn't be a new IP, but it would kind of be like a new game IP, right? So people are just not taking risks in the AAA space. And I think instead what they're doing is they're really relying on like what I would call AA or indie to come up with the creative ideas like Vampire Survivor or, Pal World. We've got...
I'm not even sure I'd call Pal World a creative idea
necessarily. Well, more what I'm saying with Pal World
Hi-Fi Rush.
Yes. Hi-Fi Rush. Well, Hi-Fi Rush technically is sort of, it's under a publisher. I wouldn't really consider it a AAA game, but yeah. My point with most of this is like creativity is not coming from AAA. They're relying on people that can take the financial risk to take it, and then they're going to bastardize it into something that they think they can make money off of. And I'm sorry for being a hippie, but I think that's kind of just gross.
I think if nothing else, it's lazy, right? But I also think that the majority of business decisions are
lazy. When they can be.
They're based on predictive models that in no way factor in really quality artistic integrity, which I understand we're talking about the confluence of business and art here. Mildred, you're making my point worse. We're talking about the nexus point where business and art meet, and unfortunately, you need business to fund art, so business just wins.
Yeah.
In this space, and it's important to note at this point that AAA is really a denotation of the budget of a game, not anything else necessarily.
Well, it's definitely just starting to be like the everything bad about gaming and what gaming could be is starting to be what AAA embodies. I also just think it's really funny. So in one of the videos I watched last night, it was talking about how the phrase AAA came about. Do you know this, Aaron?
I do, actually, and it's fascinating.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, which was me, it's based on a finance term. So there's like A bonds or A-rated bonds, which are considered to be safe bets. So if you invest in an A-rated bond, or was it stock? Regardless, A-rated stock, A-rated bond, you should be confident that you will get your money back from that investment. And so apparently it's said that someone working at like a local, not distributor, but game store was
like a retailer.
Yeah, like a retailer was pointing out to an employee that the distributors would give ratings to games, A being the best rating. So if a game had a bunch of A's, it would be AAA game because it was getting, you would want to buy that game because it was consistently being rated at an A. And therefore, people were more likely to want to buy that from your store. So anyway, I thought that was interesting, especially because AAA games these days often means rushed product, overpriced. It may not work. Day one patch, although a lot of people do that. But it's just so funny because I was talking to somebody at a game event for South by recently, and I was like, honestly, it's a safer bet to just assume a AAA game is going to be a bust, than anything else, because most of them suck now.
Yeah. I actually think that, I definitely used to look at AAA games and be like, okay, when's the next big AAA game coming out, And now I think, more so than thinking about it as, a tentpole game to set my calendar by, I know at this point this game's coming out and I'm going to be in it because it's a AAA game. AAA to me reads more as how important is this to the studio behind it? How important is this to the publisher behind it? And you can usually tie that, and you can usually figure out how much they're betting on a game just based on the marketing for it.
Yep.
And stuff like that. But you're right. By and large, AAA games at this point, with there's always notable exceptions, but by and large, AAA games, especially live service games, at this point, you shouldn't get them at launch. Right? Helldivers 2, again, to bring that comparison back up, had the advantage of launching at, I believe, $40, which is a reasonable entry price for something that's going to be constantly updated and that you can and probably will put a little bit of extra money into at some point. But neither Suicide Squad or Skull and Bones had that benefit. They were both priced as premium games.
We talked about it on the last episode, or I think, no, not last one, because last one was on unions. The one before that, I think. We were talking about, expectations based on how expensive a game is. Players are willing to put up with more jank if the game isn't premium AAA priced. And so, in a way, AAA is shooting themselves in the foot when they mark something up as a $70, $60 game when, it's not releasing in a polished state. It just looks really fucking bad, especially when there's games like Last Epoch, which is directly competing with Diablo, which was a $70 game, more money depending on how you bought it. It's just absolutely embarrassing to see Last Epoch, which is selling for $35, be this monumental success, just way better in terms of maintaining users and community feedback than Diablo 4. And I'm sure their budget was way less. It's just,
well, it would have to be.
It's just fucking crazy. They're doing so well with 264.7K peak concurrent players. It's the 39th most played game on Steam ever. Like, you can make great games and they don't need to be AAA. And we're just seeing that so much more recently with things like Last Epoch. You mentioned Hi-Fi Rush. I'm not a huge fan of Power World. Watch the Power World episode, but Power World, Helldiver, Lethal Company. We've talked about a bunch of these like indie or AAA or AA games that are just doing so well. They're not selling for $70 and they're just better.
Yeah. I think the thing that we're seeing happen, and it's not new, but I think it's maybe just more pronounced now, is, again, a lot of these design decisions that are hamstringing AAA games are the result of the fact that the AAA game is a bet that needs to pay off for the publisher, for the studio.
Yeah.
So rather than hoping that this otherwise solid game will sell enough copies to justify its own existence, they do layer on these terrible mechanics and exploitative monetization, strategies and whatnot that are A, very off-putting, B, very exploitative, and C, end up disrupting the flow of the game. That's taking polish even entirely out of that. Whereas, a more streamlined studio can just make a product and release the product. So we're seeing compromises in design. We're seeing unrealistic timelines leading to messed up polish phases, and Skull and Bones has its own set of fascinating circumstances as to what went on in the development scene behind there. But the result is, like you said, something where, looking at these AA games, they're just better, they're more reliable, they're more inventive, and they tend to be less exploitative. And I think part of that is because they're not financially beholden to the concept of line go up constantly forever, otherwise you've failed.
Well, it references our press reset episode when we were talking about Visceral and EA and how Dead Space was often considered a commercial failure because it wasn't making as much money as what they wanted. It was making money. It was making a lot more money than it cost, but it wasn't making an exponential amount more money. And that, I think, is exactly what you're hitting on, is these games that aren't beholden to stakeholders and are independently owned, they're private companies, they don't have to play the same game that AAA publishers and developers have to. They're not beholden to the same master. They just need to make enough of a profit so that they can stay in business. They don't have to make an exponential amount more profit, and they're just in such a better position to make good games because they don't have to put dumb shit into the game to make it profitable. And there's just so much less, I wouldn't say there's so much less risk, because there's a massive amount of risk in game development, but you've got more freedom to do what you want. And also, I think what's really interesting, and what I was hoping we were going to see from Embracer when we talked about them in an episode like, so very long ago, before, we realized
everything
that was
went
a whole
to
nightmare.
shit.
Yeah. I was hoping that they were going to make more investments in smaller teams, and the idea would be, we may not have as exponential of growth per game, but we're going to have so many games that are cheaper to make, do well, that we won't be as volatile. That's what I was really hoping for, and it looks like that, didn't really work out.
Because theoretically, this problem is largely solvable by having a large enough portfolio, and it's something that it's actually something that all of the big three publishers are struggling with right now. Well, the big three, like, console people are struggling with, is like the pace of our product releases is not necessarily what we want it to be. Like, PlayStation does not have an exclusive for 2024 that they're super jazzed about. And that's causing, like, investor panic and shit. That's wild. But, like, theoretically, like you were saying, we did talk about Embracer potentially being this umbrella that said, okay, we've got all of you, make your things, and then we'll set up an effective release schedule to basically simulate the constant non-volatile income stream of a live service game. But no, they didn't do that. They instead just burned it all to the ground. and danced on it.
Yep. No, it's very frustrating to me. Just very frustrating, especially because I forgot what game it was that I was listening about, but it was like a 50-person team is easily capable of making a really solid video game. And if you just, do some very basic math with how much you're going to pay out to each of those people, even if you sell the game for like $40, if you sell enough units, you can easily make a profit with a smaller team. Like it's not making team bigger makes it more expensive. Keeping teams small makes expense small. Like,
yeah,
I don't know. I just think it's so frustrating. And also I think that there's this like, and maybe this really is a sentiment and like, I'm just really out of the loop in terms of being in the gaming community, as a consumer, but like, I don't need every game to be AAA. Like, if every game was just a tight, cohesive, fun experience, something like Helldivers, like, I don't mean that literally, like, all games are like Helldivers in a literal sense, but, in terms of polish and effort and all that, I'd be happy. Like, not everything needs to be these crazy expensive, like, 4 to 5 year long projects. And that's so frustrating to me because for some reason, I think publishers think that's what audiences are demanding. And then we see these like these successes, like Helldivers or Power World or BattleBit, et cetera, right? And there's these like smaller teams, at least in comparison, and like they're doing well. They're doing a great job, and a lot of them aren't pushing the envelope when it comes to like graphics. Like Lethal Company does not look graphically great.
No. Well, I think that's the other thing about having a team of people that are making creative decisions, not influenced directly by people who really want to sit a couple inches higher on their wallets. Is you get to decide, the best fit for this is our budget and our story and the tone we're going for is X art style. Whereas if you're a AAA game, you need to be pushing your ray tracing, you need to be pushing this, you need to be pushing that, you need to have 60 FPS, blah, 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 because the consoles are going to try and sell their consoles using your game. And you want that real estate for your ads. And, so graphical fidelity is a selling point of a high budget game. And a game can be trashed out of existence for not looking up to snuff in people's minds, even if the core gameplay is solid. That expectation is largely stripped away when you drop down to something like a AAA or an indie.
Yeah.
Well, or AA or indie, sorry.
We even saw that with Suicide Squad. I don't know if you saw like the side-by-side comparisons. And now I think that's a little bit unfair because the new Suicide Squad game is, I think, a much bigger game. I think there's a lot more going on in it than one of the Arkham games where there's like a Harley Quinn. I don't know if you saw like the Harley Quinn side-by-side. But the
I have
older
seen
game,
stuff like that.
Yeah, the older game looked much better. Like the lighting was better. The materials looked a little bit better. It just looked better. It was a little bit darker, fit that kind of art style a little better. Anyway, like you are right. Games get lobotomized, or not lobotomized. That's not the right word for what I'm trying to describe, but they get torn apart by people online for looking bad. But I still think that's dumb because like I would rather have more good games more often than less good games less often that look good. Like it's just so stupid. I just hate the over reliance on graphics. Like if that's truthfully what's making AAA so ridiculously cumbersome and hard to put out, just fucking stop. Just fucking stop.
Yeah.
I don't care enough for it to like have this big of a negative impact.
Yeah, I really don't think graphical fidelity is the prime culprit. I really don't. But I don't know. I think what we're looking at here is a shocking misunderstanding of priorities in that space. And I'm not opposed to shareholders getting their own. I understand you invested in something because you expected a return on that investment, but these changes to where most of the money is in the industry moving forward will result in a fully less robust AAA game space, a fully less reliable, as if that were even possible, AAA game space, and ultimately a much more bland, homogenized IP wasteland.
I guess to jump off what you said, and I do think at this point I'm just kind of looking through everything that I had written down from our notes. I don't think I have any big ideas that I haven't said at this point. I feel like for the most part I've kind of elaborated on my main thoughts. So to kind of wrap it up with a bow and reflect what you were just referencing, I think we're still going to see, I don't even know, maybe even still a decade of really not great AAA games that are trying to chase money to the extent that they're willing to basically release product that isn't very good. I think in order for that to change, we're going to have to see publishers and AAA studios fail really badly at making live service games to the point that they start viewing it as a bad investment and start viewing single player, more honed in experiences as being something that's a safer bet. Or making new IPs. I don't know. Maybe when the economy changes and money becomes air quotes cheaper to get through loans and whatnot, maybe then we'll see more new IPs, but I don't even know when that'll happen with AAA.
I doubt that very much.
Yeah. We might just be fucked on that. The new IPs we get may just be AAA companies buying smaller studios to get the IP. I don't know.
Almost the entirety of my life in media has been the slow march away from original IP, right? It has been the rise of remakes, nostalgia reboots, spin-offs, crossovers, and I'll say it again, remakes. That's been happening in movies, that's been happening in TVs, it's been happening in games. Original IP is the definition of volatility for investors at this scale, which means as video games, especially AAA video games, become an even bigger player in the overall media landscape financially speaking, the games will just get safer. That's what I mean. If they're playing at that level, they don't have a choice but to be safer.
Yeah, if you're beholden to make money for stakeholders, and let's be honest, that's what they care about more.
Yeah.
You're right.
No, I mean
100%. They're not there to make good games. They're there to make stakeholders money. No matter what a place tells you, if it is owned, if it is publicly traded, its job is in reality to make stakeholders money. No matter what their mission statement is, no matter what else, especially in games, it's to make money.
Yeah. And again, in no way is this meant to reduce or diminish or in any way invalidate the tremendous work being done by developers to make what by and large are still incredible experiences. And there are still AAA games that come out and are great. Obviously, we've talked about many of them, but yeah, it's money. What we're looking at right now is the video games industry just playing in the safest possible space because they are worried that they're too big to fail. There's just nothing else to be done in that space.
We used to go to the diving board, but that's too risky. So now we just spend all our time in the kiddie pool.
Exactly. We can just kind of splash around and have a good time. We know the kiddie pool.
Yeah, the kiddie pool. We can see everything in the kiddie pool.
I can see everything in the kiddie pool. We know exactly what happens in the kiddie pool. So
Except
we'll
when
be
that
fine
one
in
kid
here.
pisses, that's still, kind of hard to detect.
Well, what would be the piss in this metaphor?
Um,
Is Skull and Bones the piss?
I mean, Skull and Bones is not great. I don't know if it's the piss. I feel like the piss has to be. I feel like live service is the piss. I don't
Live
know.
service might just be the piss in general. And again, well, I mean, maybe not, because I can't fully shit on live service as a concept. I can see so many theoretical experiences that are fulfilling to players. It's just, man, one success does not make a trend. Two successes does not make a trend. A series of high-profile failures and a select few tremendous successes makes, in my opinion, a volatile market. But then again, I'm not a billionaire, so what do I know?
Go fuck yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, on that note, I think the only other thing I just want to mention, because I think it's cool, and I don't know that it makes sense to do a whole episode on it, was the Toys for Bob and Saber Interactive separating from their corporate overlords. I thought that was pretty neat. Especially, I was doing some digging in the Toys for Bob situation. Aaron is like super amenable. Like, Microsoft just kind of let them leave. I don't think they had to spend money to leave. Really? I think they just let them leave, and like there were layoffs, I guess, earlier on, but it's honestly one of the best outcomes that I could see happening for them.
Yeah, that's great. I'll put 2 points in Microsoft's court. You don't put points in the court really often. I'll put 2 points in Microsoft's column. Number one, for voluntarily recognizing that 600 person union, the biggest games union.
Yeah, the QA. It's QA, right?
Yeah. Yep. And that, and allowing Toys for Bob to just slip right away from Activision. So far, they're earning points from me. I'm not willing to give them a full free pass on account of a good handful of things. But yeah, they're, at the very least, they've handled those two things what I would deem appropriately. But yeah, so that's cool. Saber and Toys for Bob,
and I think
are
Gearbox might be jumping away from Embracer as well.
There's a lot of speculation that Gearbox is going to try and, or someone's going to try and remove Gearbox from the Gearbox is on its way out of Embracer in some capacity, is the idea.
Yeah.
That's the scuttlebutt.
Yeah, so it's cool to see some of these places hopefully gain some protection as we see a lot of studio closures and layoffs and whatnot. Although with Saber Interactive, they've just got a new investor group that has like ownership of them, so we'll have to see what their new investor overlords think needs to be done. Maybe they're not out of the woods yet, but we'll see.
Yeah, and it'll definitely be interesting to keep an eye on the tug of war between rapid consolidation and these smaller studios kind of divesting from their parent companies. It'll be interesting to see how that tug of war kind of manifests in the years coming forward, because I really don't think we're seeing anywhere close to the end of it.
Yeah, I'll be curious to see. I think we're having a bit of because it's so expensive now to get studios and maintain them, I do think we're seeing a divestment. I suspect that because of all the layoffs, we might have a bunch of new indie or AA studios form up. Obviously, a lot of those will fail. Who knows how many will succeed? But that's kind of my gut feeling, is that because of how volatile and kind of toxic the games industry is right now, I would not be surprised if a bunch of, very skilled employees or people that just want to try doing it throw their hat in the ring to make their own, independent successes from big publishers and AAA. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. Lord knows if money becomes cheaper again, though, we probably will see some consolidation again for better
guaranteed.
or worse.
But yeah, as always, my support goes to the developers in these situations. Keep making your, phenomenal art, and the industry will do as it pleases. But we do still appreciate that work very, very much. And yeah, so
and we'll
who
see
else where the world goes.
We appreciate, and whose work we appreciate.
What?
I thought for sure that was your transition into the into Beach Girl.
Oh no, I didn't even hear it.
I thought, I was so sure that you were about to be like, I appreciate developers and everything you do for the games industry and all the great work you do. And you know who else I appreciate? Beach Girl, because Beach Girl's beats are.
See, no, that's a great idea. I'll try. Let's get a clean take. No, yes, of course I do appreciate Beach Girl's fine contribution to both our show and the world at large, and I do believe it's actually time to start that transition. So, my terrible, humiliating failure aside, Beach Girl is just a rousing success in every sense, for the goodness of sounds. They provided our phenomenal intro and outro music, and they have some other great tunes that you can find anywhere fine digital music can be procured. Spotify, did Bandcamp actually close down? Or was that SoundCloud? I can't remember. One of them was supposed to close down, I think.
Let's see. Keep going. Bandcamp appears to be alive.
Bandcamp, so you can still find Beach Girl on Bandcamp. SoundCloud is, the jury's still out on that one. But YouTube, SoundCloud, Bandcamp, Napster, most anywhere. Spotify. That
SoundCloud
fine
appears
digital music
to be alive.
Okay, so they're both alive and I am a fool. But Beach Girl's music remains constantly good. And do check them out, honestly. Friend of the show and just a tremendously talented performer.
And I would like to say you need to make sure to check out eDougie Art for some fantastic art on Instagram and on Etsy. eDougie Art helped us with our fantastic album cover and logo. So if you want a sick logo or album cover, make sure to check out eDougie Art. That's eDougie Art. Anyway, I don't know why I did that. But yeah. So eDougie's great. Make sure to check her stuff out. Check out Beach Girl. If Pornhub was recently banned in your state, you know, fight the good fight for Pornhub. I don't know.
Yeah.
Pornhub was banned in Texas. That's why I'm joking about that, by the way.
Wait, did Ted finally get it?
Well, it's because of the new laws around, like, they want you to have to submit an ID to prove you're, like, over 18, and Pornhub's like, that's a privacy violation, which, yeah. And so apparently this has been a thing in the US for, like, at least a year. I feel like there's, like, 8 or 9 states, maybe even 10, that, like, you just can't access Pornhub in, which I just think is kind of funny. So, maybe even problematic. I don't know. But
that is kind of funny. Well,
yeah.
And a fine note to end the show.
Yeah. Y'all didn't think we were going to talk about porn, but there it is.
Go save porn. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Is Skull and Bones the piss?